think about it pretty much most days. You know, it's incredible. I was going to a yoga class, believe it or not, at 9 o'clock on Christopher Street, which, you know, was not that far from the towers. And it was about, I was late, excuse me. So it was just a few minutes after 9. And I heard this huge boom. And, you know, New York is full of noises. It's pneumatic drills, trucks going over potholes. It's a noisy city. But this noise was unlike anything I'd ever really heard. And I came around the corner onto 7th Avenue South, where, you know, you can see the North Tower. And there were all these people pointing, and I saw the North Tower, and I saw this diagonal wound in the North Tower, and flames coming out. And someone said, you know, the people were shouting, a plane had just gone in. And I thought it was maybe a Beechcraft or a Cessna. It was, and my first thought, and I'm kind of ashamed to say this, was, wow, I wish I'd bought my fucking camera. Because it was just, it was an amazing sight. But the guy said, no, it was a jetliner. I remember he said those words, it's a jetliner. And, you know, there was nothing I could do. I was late. So I really didn't think that much more about it other than, oh my God, people have just been killed. So and this is crazy. I went to this class on Christopher Street from between 9 and 10, which was underground. It was in the basement of Crunch Gym. And when we came out at 10 o'clock, the whole world had just changed because people were freaking out because the second plane had gone in, I believe, about 20 minutes later. And most of us in the class were really angry that no one had told us, or come down to the class and said, hey guys, something major has happened. But anyway, so we congregated outside on Christopher Street where the North Tower, the top third was just obliterated with smoke. You couldn't see any of the structure except flames. And I'm getting quite emotional talking about it now because you could start to see people already jumping. Just tiny bits of what I thought was debris, but the way they were falling, they weren't floating, they were plummeting. So it occurred to me that this was something beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And people were saying, well, maybe it's a movie. Maybe they're shooting a movie. And I said, no, because both towers have been hit. This was not a movie. It was not an accident. So, and I don't really remember cycling home. I lived on 9th between 5th and 6th. And I honestly don't remember cycling home. But by the time I got home, it was about 20 to 11, you know, and my family were flipping out. My kids were in school. And here's the real kicker, Shirley. My daughter went to a school in that area near Wall Street. And she had a double period free from between 9 and 11. And she used to go and study at a house near Worth Street. So, you know, really very, very close to the whole scene. And I was flipping out, you know, because we couldn't get hold of it. And we found out later that the AT&T tower was on top of the North Tower, you know, the big pylon. So all cell phones were out, you know, there was no cell phone service. And that was it really. And then, of course, we're glued to the TV, and then the tower, I forget which one came down first. I think the second one, the South Tower came down first, and I could not believe what I was seeing. My wife was saying, you have to go. My other children were in Brooklyn, just across the water. And I never forget leaving the house on 9th Street, and I ran into a cop and I said, I've got to get into the subway. He said, pal, you're on your own. I never forgot that. You're on your own, because I don't know what the fuck is going on. Pardon my French, but this is exactly what happened. and it was just chaos in the street. They closed everything south of 14th Street, the avenue, the street that runs across the big street. That was closed to all vehicular traffic coming from the north of Manhattan. No one was allowed to go. But because I lived on 9th and the subways were closed, they'd close the subways. And it was just panic, for those few hours while we collected ourselves. And my first thought was the children. I had to go and get the kids. And around about 3 in the afternoon, we got a call from the parents of Jemima's study friend. She's with us, she's safe. And then I had to go to Brooklyn to get my other kid. It was just, wow. Yeah. And then I guess the other parts of my story, a couple of weeks, I guess about a week later, we heard through the grapevine that the Red Cross needed drivers because this was the biggest Red Cross operation in their history. And there were trucks coming from all over the country. And I mean, when I went to the HQ in Brooklyn, there were trucks from San Diego, Red Cross trucks. There were trucks from Washington State, had driven, you could see on the license plates, had driven all over the country to be at this Red Cross HQ. They couldn't accommodate all the Red Cross trucks. So they were parked all over the streets and in the compound. But they needed drivers, and even though I was English, and I've been there since 95, so I've been there 6 years. I had to take a test. I had to swear that I wouldn't touch anything because it was a crime scene. They weren't accepting anyone from the Middle East, anyone of any Muslim origin, because of the anti-feeling at the time, a week after. There was such anti-foreign, xenophobic feeling in the air. A lot of people were scared to come forth, and they weren't being allowed to register for the Red Cross. So me being, white, English, and I knew my way around Manhattan. I knew my way around New York because it's quite simple. It's a grid. It's north, south, east, west. Manhattan is very easy to navigate. So I knew my way around very well. I took the kids to school every day. I could drive, and I knew my way around New York. So after a brief lecture, they allowed me to start driving back and forth, taking crews, volunteers to the pile, what they call the pile. And I never forget coming under the Battery Tunnel and seeing for the first time with my Red Cross supervisor. He said, prepare yourself because you're going to cry. I guarantee you will cry when you see this. And he was right. And that was my first visit to Ground Zero. And I worked there for about 3 weeks taking supplies, mainly supplies, because it was still, September, it was still hot. And they desperately needed fresh water. And I'll never forget the first time I went there, you had to have a special Red Cross laminate saying that you were allowed to go to Ground Zero. And then Red Cross gave us these masks, with two filters. And I kind of dawned on me that no one was wearing a goddamn mask on that pile. Or very few, some had bandanas, some of the firemen had, bandanas, and they were drilling, and it was like a giant, that game Pick a Sticks, where you have all these, you have to pull one out, and it was like that, only with girders, huge girders and debris and concrete slabs, and those strange Y-shaped. Remember the the superstructure around the towers and those Y-shaped columns. Some were still standing, but you know, most of them were collapsed. And then on about the fourth day I was working there, I'll never forget this, and I actually wrote a song about it. All the sirens went, and we thought, oh my God, there's something else is coming in. But the supervisors were going, shush, 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 shush. And we all, you know, stopped what we were doing. And a lot of guys took off their hard hats, because coming down the ramp was the first relatives. You've probably heard this, and I'll never, ever forget the sight of, there must have been 100 relatives, all carrying photos, flowers, teddy bears, little stuffed animals. And, you know, and all grown men just weeping at the sight of these dignified people, a lot of them in tears, but they were just quiet, and they were linking arms, and they were walking down to lay flowers at the site. Yeah. And my ex-wife and my daughters were working at the Marriott just around the corner, helping the fire crews. And I had to inject a little bit of humor, because it was so horrible. But the first time I picked up a crew, mainly firemen, to go back to their various homes, I had all their addresses, and I was driving this 15-seater minibus, you know, and I get on the bus, and they're all there covered in dust, they're like sleeping. And I said, hello, everyone, I'm Simon, I'm your driver for today. Now, does anyone know where the fuck we're going? And they were like, who's this clown? And a lot of them laughed. And I said, it's okay, I got all your names. And I had to, you know, John Schwartz, hey, I'm here. You know, I had to read all the lists and make sure everyone was on board. But so that's what I did. And then my final stint really with the Red Cross, and to me, this was the most dramatic. I had to pick up this nurse who had come in from Iowa, Ames, Iowa. And she was to go to Freshkills landfill, you know, where all the debris from the site was taken. And I met her at the terminal, you know, on 8th Avenue, you know, the bus terminal. She was a little thing, probably about 60. She wasn't a young, you know, and she'd never been to New York. And she was a registered nurse, and she'd been assigned to this, to go to this landfill. And I'd never been before. And I had to get another special laminate, because this was where all the debris was being examined. So I had to have another clearance. Anyway, I talked to her as we drove. It was quite a long way from, you know, from the terminal on 8th Avenue to, is it Staten Island, I guess? I've forgotten. Yeah, Staten Island. And she was very nervous. I said, look, you know, she said, my God, she's looking like a, you know, tourist, looking at all the buildings. And I said, are you okay? You're going to be okay? She said, yeah, I'm okay. I've been a nurse for 40 years, so I've seen it all. I said, well, you know, I hope you're going to be okay. So we got into Freshkills. We passed the security, and Shireen, I'll never forget this. We went in through the gates, and then you start to go round and round, and I'm driving this truck, and we're going up and up and up and up and up. And the first thing I saw was a fire truck, a full fire truck that had been flattened so flat, I could have put my arms around it. It was completely, this was a 20-ton fire truck that had been crushed like a Coke can. And I felt her sort of freeze. And I'm like, what the hell? And then we get up on the site, and it was one of those days in New York where the sky, there's no cloud. It's just this leaden, it was just, there was no cloud, no sun, nothing. It was just gray. And the site was this huge site where all the garbage from New York goes. But now it had all these tiny little like earth diggers and little conveyor belts, and people with hazmat suits are putting debris on these conveyor belts, and then other guys are examining each piece of debris as it goes down this conveyor belt. And there's a whole line of tents, maybe a dozen tents, CIA, National Security Council, FBI, the Port Authority Police, every security department that you can think of is represented here by these tents. And we find the Red Cross tent, and you know, I drive up there. We're completely white with shock. And I get out and I have to, you know, have a coffee, and I give her a hug because, and I never saw her again. And she was, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Thank you so much. La, la, la. So I'm talking to one of the guys. I got to collect myself. And I look at the far end of this huge site, and there's another big tent. And I notice all over the site, there are seagulls and birds, you know, they going for the trash or whatever. But here, there's nothing. And I said, that's kind of odd that there's no birds. He said, well, that's where the human remains are being examined, and no bird will fly over it. And that, I was, wow. And yeah. So really, I got in my truck and I came back to the city, and like I said, I never saw the nurse again. And after about another couple of weeks, they closed the investigation, and I came back to normal life, such as it was.
At what point did you, going back to the first aid, how long a period of time did you not know the fate of Jemima, your daughter?
Jemima and Lola. Oh God, about 3 hours. And we had other friends, you know, she went to St. Anne's. So St. Anne, which is in Brooklyn. And the odd thing is that St. Anne's is actually closer to Ground Zero than I was on 9th Street. So when I finally, with a bunch of other people, convinced the police to let us go into the subway, and they got the subway working again, because they weren't letting anyone go underground. Everyone was suspicious of everyone. And the cops said, no, no, no. And believe it or not, we had an ally in Susan Sarandon, who was a neighbor, and her daughter went to St. Anne's, and she was able to, you know, vouch and say, hey, okay, you know, she helped. And I never forget coming out of, I think it's Borough Street station, and seeing all the leaflets, all the bits of paper that the wind had taken. They were still coming down at 4 in the afternoon. And got Jemima, and I was just, wow. So yeah.
But you say one of your children was going to school down there?
Yeah, I'm trying to collect my thoughts. God, I can't believe it's 20 years, but
yeah.
Jemima went to St. Anne's.
Right.
And so did Lola, my youngest. But Jemima, no, okay, you might want to edit. Jemima had a double free, and she was in Worth Street. That's right. So I didn't collect Jemima. I collected Lola from St. Anne's. And I believe Jemima was delivered back to us. No, I went to get Jemima. I went to get Jemima a little later on in the afternoon. I had to carry my driver's license. Look, I live on 9th Street, man. I swear to God. Because even though I was white and I was still a foreigner, I had this English accent, and the cops were so I mean, you could touch them and they would jump a mile. Everyone was so jumpy. So anyone who didn't fit the norm of a New Yorker was instantly under suspicion. And I had to, you know, just say, I got a kid down on Worth Street, you know, and no cell phones were working, so the cops couldn't verify my story. It was just chaos, Shelley. You know, it was just complete chaos. But I never forgot the firemen and the workers on the pile, and the heat. September 11th was a very hot day, and I believe the next 4 or 5 days after, it was still in the 80s, and you know, there were things starting to smell. Quite honestly, it was. And every time I went there, you know, we put on the mask, but no one was wearing a goddamn mask. It was just, and we know now that so many of those poor guys died from inhaling all the shit that was coming off the pile, you know.
And those who aren't ill are wondering when they're going to get cancer. They're not saying if, they're saying when. It's a nightmare that just won't end. Tell us about the song that you wrote and how people can hear it.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a strange thing. Coming back one night, I believe the second or third night that I've been working on the pile, or around the pile. I would not say I worked on the pile. I'm not that honorable. But coming back from doing my work in the evening, the weirdest thing, and I found out later what this poem was, but on 14th Street station, there was a flapping piece of paper that's been taped. And it was, all I could see was amber waves of grain, something, don't cry for me, or something like that. And it triggered something in my brain. And I wrote a song called Message from the Lost. And it was as if the people who had died were speaking to their living relatives and loved ones. And it's called Message from the Lost. I made a solo album. I recorded it. Still one of the best songs I ever wrote. Unfortunately, it was inspired by these tragic events. And it's on an album that you can get. It's called 7 Rays of Hope. And it's called Message from the Lost. And yeah, I'm kind of proud of it because, and then I found out later that piece of poetry that had been flapping was actually a very famous poem written by a lady for her son who was killed, I believe, in the Civil War. And it's quite a famous poem. And I've tried to find, I haven't plagiarized or copied anything. I wouldn't do that, but what I saw inspired me to write. And it says, weep no more, dry your tears, do not weep for me, I'm not here. I am in the eyes of our baby's child. I am on the face of the soft sleeping child. I am in I am in the stars shining on a moonlit night. I am under the wings of an eagle in flight. And then weep no more. And then there's a second verse. So I'm inferring that the spirits of the dead are still with the relatives in the first snowfall, the setting sun, and so on. But it's called Message from the Lost. You can look it up.
I'm sure you have to know that the people you were driving, the firefighters, the crews, no doubt were fans of your music with Free and Bad Company. And I'm sure you never mentioned that.
No, I didn't. They might have got something when I'm sitting in a traffic light, you know, and the indicator's on and I'm beating a time on the steering wheel, but no, I didn't reveal, you know, who I was.
I'm sure. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, that's it.
Thank you so much.